President George H.W. Bush making his last trip to the U.S. Capitol, then being laid to rest in Texas. Tonight, we're looking at the legacy of the 41st president. Tonight, H.W. lies in state at our nation's capital. He was the president who managed the end of the Cold War and forged a global coalition to oust Iraqi forces from Kuwait. Thousands around the world are mourning this great loss. The public is now able to view the body of the former president at the U.S. Capitol. That's our top story. Good evening. I'm Lauren Hensley. Thousands around the world are honoring the fallen president. Flags have been lowered all across the nation. Here in Southeast Texas, the Port Arthur police station showing their respect. The 41st president died this weekend at his home in Houston. His remains have made the journey from Houston to a funeral home to Ellington Field, where a presidential aircraft was waiting. Air Force One transported the remains along with his family to our nation's capital. NBC's Jay Gray is there and shows us how he's being honored.
Across the country tonight, thousands stopped to say goodbye.
It's very sad. He was a great man, and we loved him.
More than 100 standing solemnly at Ellington Field as George H.W. Bush boards Air Force One, the aircraft renamed for this special trip Special Air Mission 41, in honor of the 41st president. He travels to Washington for the last time. Dignitaries, including Vice President Mike Pence, paying their respects during a brief ceremony in the Capitol Rotunda.
We thank you for sharing this special man with our nation and the world,
where thousands over the next couple of days are expected to gather to say goodbye.
He helped a lot of people, and he's just a wonderful man.
Mourners celebrating almost 70 years of sacrifice and dedication to his country. As a fighter pilot shot down during World War II, a congressman, ambassador to the United Nations, director of the CIA, vice president, then president, and out of office, he championed a host of charitable causes until his final few years when illness confined President Bush to a wheelchair and his thoughts turned to what was next.
I used to worry about death and all. I don't anymore. But I have a feeling there's an afterlife, and I have a feeling it's a good one.
Well-deserved for a patriot president, and the cornerstone of an era of civility in politics many fear is now gone with his passing. Jay Gray, NBC News, Washington.
There will be a private funeral service in Houston on Thursday, and President George H.W. Bush will be buried on the grounds of his presidential library in College Station next to his beloved wife, Barbara. Closer to home now, many in our region are mourning the loss of the former president. 12 News reporter Mackenzie Hinkle continues our coverage with a look at how local Republicans are reflecting on his leadership.
Yes, today I spoke with Republican officials on the type of leader George H.W. Bush was, what he'll be remembered for, and how his passing affects the nation.
I don't view political experience as a detriment, Mr. Chairman. I view it as an asset.
A life lived, a legacy left behind.
I am a candidate for President of the United States.
41st president not only impacted the people throughout our nation, but also influenced the Republican leaders here in our backyard.
He was absolutely probably the most cohesive president of my lifetime.
New breezes blowing, and a world refreshed by freedom seems reborn.
Judy Nichols is the chairwoman of the Jefferson Republican Party.
It's kind of the leadership technique I would like to use in our county is, we should be neighbors first and then break into our political subdivision second.
She remembers when George H.W. Bush once said, "I do not mistrust the future. I do not fear what is ahead. For our problems are large, but our heart is larger."
H.W. Bush was probably the premier leader of our time in finding common ground and common issues.
Something Nichols says you don't find as much of with today's politicians. The former president's command of foreign policy sticks out in her memory and what he did to bring down the Berlin Wall.
In his style of bringing people together, he gave that to the people of Germany.
As great of a person and president that he was, she says we can't think of it as a loss.
And knowing where he's at, along with Barbara, it's hard to see it as a loss.
Our local leaders hope President George H.W. Bush's example of kindness and compassion are ones we can all follow. In the studio, Mackenzie Hinkle, 12 News.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Let's go ahead and take a look at the procession from earlier today. Before that flight to Capitol Hill, a hearse carrying the casket of the former President H.W. Bush left a Houston funeral home, a very somber moment there as they're exiting that funeral home. The casket was draped in an American flag and was carried by 6 pallbearers, all 6 having a special connection. They were former Secret Service personnel assigned to protecting the former president. Many people stood along the procession route to pay their last respects. Southeast Texas has its own link with the Houston Bush ceremonies. Symphony of Southeast Texas conductor and musical director Chelsea Tipton will be conducting the Houston Symphony tonight at 7 o'clock. He will lead a Bush tribute at Herman Square in downtown Houston. The National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. is making final preparations ahead of Wednesday's state funeral. This will be the 4th state funeral held at the cathedral. All the living former presidents and President Trump will attend. Roughly 3,000 invited guests and dignitaries are expected to be there. A cathedral spokesperson provided some insight onto the personal touches we can expect.
All of the hymns were chosen by President Bush and the Bush family, the readings, the scriptures. This is a very custom-tailored event, what they wanted, and we're just happy to be able to execute it.
Security will be tight for the service. The roads going by the cathedral in Northwest D.C. will be shut down. Here are this week's plans to honor the former president. There will be a public funeral at Washington National Cathedral Wednesday. That same day, his remains will be returned to Houston, where his body will lie in repose before it is then transported to College Station for burial at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library. Former President Bush may not have been born in Texas, but Bush's impact on the state and Houston goes well beyond what most can imagine. Businessman Jim McEnvell, better known as Mattress Mac, had a special bond with the 41st president. The front entrance of his Gallery Furniture flagship location has pictures of the Bushes. Mac says most of these keepsakes are always on display, but in the wake of the former president's passing, Mac brought out some more sentimental items to honor number 41.
President Bush was a great man and a legendary leader for the entire world, the country, and most especially for Texas and Houston, and he will be missed for decades to come.
Mattress Mac says George H.W. was a humble, friendly, and a gentleman. The heartfelt posts continue to pour in online. President Trump tweeting, "Looking forward to being with the Bush family to pay my respects to President George H.W. Bush." He's planning to pay his respects tonight. Former VP Joe Biden says President H.W. Bush was a decent, kind, and gracious statesman. This nation will miss him. Former President Barack Obama tweeted, "America has lost a patriot, a humble servant. While our hearts are heavy, they're also filled with gratitude." Jim McGrath, the family spokesperson, also tweeted about how the 41st president will be carried to his funeral wearing socks that pay tribute to his lifetime of service. Starting at 18 years old, he was a naval aviator in the war, and you can see those aviation planes on those socks. Now we want to hear from you. What do you remember most about former President George H.W. Bush? Come on over and chat with us on our 12 News Now Facebook Live.